Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni Viewer, and welcome to Genre Bender's Obscurities and Flawed Gems, where we look at the best stuff you've never heard of. Today is November 3rd, known to G-fans all around the world as Godzilla Day. It's not an official holiday, but since the King's popularity has been picking up, it's really become better recognized. And as such, I figure it's a good time to look at the IDW graphic novel compilation entitled Godzilla's 70th Anniversary. Didn't Godzilla's 70th Anniversary already come and go? Well, yes, but I'm notoriously bad at capitalizing on things when they're actually relevant, so I'm only just getting to it now. Good point. I assume you won't be doing the whole thing, though. No, I will not. The first 9 chapters of the book are original comics made specifically for this release, but the final 4 are reprints of issues from Godzilla Legends, Godzilla Rage Across Time, Godzilla in Hell, and Godzilla Rulers of Earth respectively. They were probably included because they were both popular entries and fit in thematically. For today's purposes, I will be focusing exclusively on the content original to this book, going chapter by chapter. So, may as well start where it's most prudent to do so, at the beginning. During IDW's first run of Godzilla comics, they brought on James Stokoe to make Godzilla the Half-Century War, a dramatic tale about a man waging a one-man vendetta against the King of the Monsters from 1954 all the way to 2004. It's one of their better graphic novels, to be honest, so naturally they were going to bring him back for this compilation, but I wonder if they expected his contribution to turn out the way it did. The Half-Century Boar follows 2 men named Bullet and Yilmaz who joined the anti-kaiju force in 1971. Although eager to see combat, they get stuck with the literal crap job of cleaning up the mess left behind after a fight between Godzilla and Hedorah in Istanbul, not Constantinople. Why did Constantinople get the works? That's nobody's business but the Turks. Anyway, the comic follows the duo as they spend the next 3 years collecting Hedorah sludge, only for Godzilla to return and destroy the container because, as it turns out, Hedorah was reforming inside it, making the job utterly pointless. In contrast with the Half-Century War, the Half-Century Boar can be described as darkly comedic. Right at the beginning, the enthusiasm of our new recruits gets undercut when they realize they won't be fighting on the front line, but will instead be glorified janitors disposing of monster refuse. And if you think Kafka from Kaiju number 8 had it bad, wait until you see these guys. They spend 3 years stuck in one place dealing with toxic waste, and it takes a toll on their health. It should be depressing, and the overall tone is definitely nihilistic, but Stokoe's approach treats the overall situation as more absurd than tragic. Based on the understated final line, the outlook is less woe is us and more, oh great, here we go again. That's probably how people would feel if events like this were real. You spend years rebuilding and recovering, and the uncaring monsters just show up again to undo it all. Agreed, and it was an interesting choice to shine a light on the less glamorous side of living in a kaiju world. Like I said, it's dark humor, but the brevity keeps it from being too overbearing, so it's a different but good way to kick things off. In this tale by Dan DiDio, a scientist named Mizuno is developing a new sort of bioweapon for the military, but it results in a new kaiju, a massive mosquito named Usuru. The bug carries a pathogen that could wipe out all life on Earth, but Godzilla is on the case to take it down. Godzilla fighting the embodiment of a virus that could destroy the world, huh? Sounds like an allegory to me. Yeah, I have a feeling this one was at least partly inspired by the 2020 pandemic. Does that include the part where it was grown in a lab? Well, maybe, but only one person wears a mask. That would be reporter Martin Short, whose name is a sly reference to the coincidental shared name of a famous Godzilla character and a comedian who rose to fame much later. That's the only such meta-reference the comic makes, though, and it remains focused on the primary plot otherwise. Mizuno is our main protagonist, as she is the scientist who made both the pathogen and, by extension, Usuru. At the beginning of the story, she is driven entirely by ambition, and she even considers the pathogen to be her greatest achievement. When the situation goes sideways, she initially tries to shift blame to the military, but that doesn't work out so well. In the end, she can't deny that the disaster is ultimately her fault, even if it wasn't what she intended to do. One could potentially view Mizuno as a dark mirror to Dr. Serizawa, being a scientist who makes something with world-ending potential and all that. As for Godzilla, this tale seems to draw heavily from his monsterverse characterization, mixed with the early 60s anti-hero depiction. Here, Godzilla is shown to be a keeper of the natural order. He intervenes to prevent wholesale destruction rather than wantonly causing it, and he's even smart enough to figure out Usuru's artificial origins and deliver retribution. It's a familiar characterization that's not especially groundbreaking, but overall it works for the tale being told. Now, the ending is a bit unexpected. As it turns out, the whole thing was a simulation run by Mizuno on her computer, and the catastrophic outcome convinces her to end the project, to destroy her research, and just outright quit to prevent anything like it happening in reality. Can't blame her when the worst-case scenario ends with Godzilla blasting her in the face with his heat ray. While it does come close to being an "it was all a dream" ending, it's actually not, because the simulated events still have consequences in the reality of the story. Specifically, it gives Mizuno a character arc in which she faces the ultimate consequences for her actions, but she still gets a chance to do the right thing in the end before it really goes too far. The final image of Godzilla somehow manifesting in the computer is a bit odd and not entirely necessary, but it at least makes for a neat visual. Courtesy of Danny Lore, we follow a man named Ito, a black market dealer in kaiju refuse, fragments, and DNA. Or so he claims. In truth, he's a con man who so far has been really good at fooling people into buying junk that he claims is worthwhile. Yet his latest deal might be where his luck runs out, as he's dealing with a ruthless gangster who has hired an expert to confirm that a shipment of sea monkeys labeled as Destroya microbes is legit. Only divine intervention can save Ito's hide now, or barring that, an interruption thanks to a kaiju fight. This one is admittedly lighter on the kaiju action, but that does not make it uninteresting. From the moment we see Ito greeted by a bodyguard who has just worked over some poor sap on his boss's behalf, we know the guy is in over his head. The situation escalates quickly but naturally on its own, then escalates further when a fight between Godzilla and Biollante gets too close for comfort. Yet this doesn't save Ito so much as increase the odds of him dying, as now he must run from both monsters who don't know he's there and gangsters who do. The primary arc here is about Ito losing his ego. As a con man, you can imagine that he considers himself smarter than those he cons. For this job, he's not only in physical danger, but he's up against a brain that can outmatch his, and Ito is smart enough to know that his control is slowly slipping away. Then, of course, coming face to face with Godzilla utterly shatters his self-perception. He has essentially been saved by something akin to a god, yet it was purely by chance, as this is a god who couldn't care less about him. After all, who is Ito but a glorified trickster collecting and selling scraps of the unknowable? Really, you could call it a classic example of cosmic horror. It's short, not at all sweet, and it executes its point succinctly. Yeah, but Godzilla looks different in each of the panels he shows up in. He goes from Heisei in the first shot to Monsterverse in the second, and Polygon Trilogy by the end. You'd think that for only 3 drawings the artist could have at least been consistent. Yeah, that is a bit distracting, but the story itself is still good. This time around, we get a nameless child's perspective as she navigates a city ravaged by the king of the monsters. Along the way, she picks up an unexpected companion, a discarded trilobite whom she decides to bring back to the sea and feels an odd kinship with. The plot for this one is technically by artist Matt Frank, but there's a lyrical element in the form of poetic narration contributed by Donnie Winter. Now, I actually know Donnie Winter, not well, but I do know him. I've appeared on his channel, and we've been in a couple of podcasts and live streams together. I just want to clear that up and let you know that that will not affect my assessment of the final story. Overall, this lyrical narration works well with the imagery, and the style feels less like an internal monologue and more like a memory recalled by an adult. It even adds a strange sense of wistfulness to an otherwise dire situation. That said, and I hope this doesn't upset him, but I do wonder if the narration is really needed. I mean, the visuals convey everything pretty clearly, as one would expect from a visual medium. The poetry reads nicely and spells it all out, but does it need to? Could the comic still function without it? The next chapter has no narration and works just fine, so I can't help but wonder. Well, it's there either way, and it doesn't detract from the story. Overall, this one is fine. Not spectacular, not awful, it's fine. That's about all I have to say, so I'll move on to the next one. From one childhood perspective to another, E.J. Sue tells the story of Takao, a little boy who must go from his well-lit living room up a dimly lit flight of stairs to his bedroom at the end of a dark hallway. Unfortunately for him, a monster lurks in that hallway. The king of them all, in fact. Only Jet Jaguar can save him now. Okay, so the idea of Godzilla as an evil monster lurking down a dark hallway is a bit of an odd choice, especially for someone like me who grew up knowing Godzilla as a protector who was too big to fit inside any kind of house. That said, though, the story is actually very nostalgic, but not in a way that has anything to do with Godzilla. Nearly every child on the planet knows that irrational fear of what might lurk in the dark. Even the familiar landscape of home seems unsafe when the lights are out, and so long as it is dark, the fear remains, even if there are covers to hide under. Shadows take strange forms, harmless objects seem eerie and dangerous, and even the slightest noise can make one jump out of one's skin. It's a fear that no child can fully articulate, but one that any child can feel. That's what makes In the Darkness work. It's a childhood nightmare, both literally and figuratively. It doesn't make sense as a Godzilla story, mind you, but the atmosphere works, so I'll give it a pass. From Adam Gorhan, this tale focuses on a family trying to evacuate as Godzilla battles an unnamed snail monstrosity, of which smaller versions pose an equal threat to our retreating humans. Now, this one goes by very quickly. The primary focus is on their family. As their initial plan to escape falls apart, the small snail monsters start picking them off, and only a few of them manage to get away. It concludes with an aftermath, showing that the patriarch has returned to the family store where everything went down. He makes it clear that he intends to stay and rebuild, because no matter what, he remains optimistic about the future. That right there is the primary takeaway from this story. The idea that no matter what, it is not impossible to rebuild, even after the worst of disasters. Beyond that, there's really not much more to say, so on to the next one. Casey Gilly tells the tale of Seneca Springs, a frontier town in the Wild West days, only this town is peopled entirely by women and protected by Mothra. A bandit who believes there's gold on the premises somehow reroutes Baragon to get Mothra out of the picture, and Godzilla shows up at the end. Yeah, I have to question the inclusion of this particular chapter because it doesn't really have anything to do with Godzilla. It's more of a Mothra story, which would be fine if this were an issue of Godzilla Rivals or a book celebrating Mothra's anniversary. As you may recall, though, this book is about 70 years of Godzilla, so a Mothra-focused story is out of place. Then again, the reason for this shift, if you haven't already figured it out, is because the story has a distinctly feminist angle to it. As mentioned, Seneca Springs is a town where there are no men, only women. Why the town is only women, and why they stay here when they have such limited resources, is never really explained. But I assume that because the main human villain is a man, we're probably meant to just assume that the town is better off without a male influence, which only makes sense if you're the variety of feminist who is also extremely against the existence of men. In order to do that, though, it turns Mothra into a very weird permutation of Wonder Woman. Yes, Mothra is a feminine kaiju and embodies certain female ideals, but she has never been an exclusively feminist character. Here, look at the people worshipping her on Infant Island in the classic movies. There are clearly a lot of men there. Heck, a man is in charge of the tribe. And how does Godzilla factor in, you ask? Well, Baragon manages to seriously wound Mothra before she defeats him. Somehow. Actually, how does she beat him? He's got her pinned, and then he just quits and lays down. Having examined the panels a bit closer, I figure that maybe Baragon is supposed to be defeated by Mothra's poison dust, but that's hard to figure out because the dust is the exact same color as the sand, which is all over the place. As such, Baragon's defeat comes out of nowhere because the art isn't able to distinguish between Mothra's most powerful attack and the general landscape. Anyway, Mothra wins, but her wing is busted and she's nearly dead. A patch for the wing is made out of gold, which seems impractical and doesn't look aerodynamic, but whatever. Yet that's not enough to heal her, so Godzilla literally appears out of nowhere, breathes life into her, and vanishes. That's the extent of his contribution. Wait, let me get this straight. The town is a feminist utopia until something breaks, then a man needs to come in and fix it? Oh yeah, that's a real empowering message right there. In the end, this is a bit of a low point. Between the lack of good explanations, the inability to properly convey certain information, the weak attempt at female empowerment, and the reduction of Godzilla to a deus ex machina, it doesn't really fit in with the other chapters. This tale by Michael W. Conrad collects the notes of one Tomoyuki Abrams, who spent his entire life studying Godzilla. He has researched the Titan exhaustively, and he was even present for certain major events. This means he has witnessed the beast's seemingly contradictory nature firsthand, and he has come to a realization about the King of the Monsters that might be the closest thing to an explanation humanity will ever get. What makes this chapter work is how we see Godzilla through the narrator's eyes, and his desire to understand gives him a unique perspective. Abrams witnesses Godzilla's destructive nature as well as his penchant to protect. Thus, he finds himself grappling with what he first perceives to be Godzilla's duality as both benevolent and malevolent, almost as if he's trying to reconcile all of the movies into a single timeline that makes sense. By the end, he realizes an unexpected truth. His conclusion is that Godzilla, when taken as a whole, is truly unknowable, a being that exists beyond any human rationale. It's not a satisfying answer, and it might not be one that mankind can accept, but Tomoyuki Abrams is certain that it is the truth. In fact, this chapter summarizes not only the entire book, but also the entire 7 decades of Godzilla's history. In the previous chapters, we have seen Godzilla as both hero and villain, protector and destroyer, savior and menace, and even a force of nature just rolling through. They are all legitimate roles for the King of the Monsters, different parts comprising one whole that inspires terror and wonder in people all over the world. Indeed, you can even tie it back to the complexities of the very first movie, wherein Godzilla spends most of the time acting as a destructive, antagonistic force, yet at the end we weep for him as he dies. In short, Conrad gets it, and he phrases it beautifully. The overall tone treats Godzilla with more reverence than any other chapter in the comic, and it's a perfect way to end things. If only it actually were the end. From Natasha Alterici, we follow a nurse who wakes up in the ruins left behind by Godzilla's devastating attack. After finding a picture of her wife and their kids, she tells another survivor to mask up as if that's going to do anything against radiation exposure, and talk circulates among the survivors that a greedy capitalist billionaire is somehow responsible for this disaster. Go ahead, guess the author's politics. Yeah, as if you couldn't tell, this chapter is just a Trojan horse for pushing a far-left political agenda. That really is it. Once again, Godzilla barely factors in. His only significant appearance is at the end, when he marches by the billionaire's home. At first, the guy seems confident that he's safe until he sees that the monster's shadow is actually the angry mob of mask-wearing survivors coming to presumably kill him. Now, to be clear, we don't really get anything solid to show that this guy is truly evil. The worst thing we see him do is briefly wonder if he can make a profit by getting medicine to the survivors, which is greedy, sure, but I wouldn't call it mustache-twirling evil. It seems like we're just meant to assume he's evil because he's a billionaire, which is apparently all we need to know. Besides, killing him will prevent another Godzilla attack because... well, there's no reason it would hurt, right? Except for the billionaire, he'll be in excruciating pain, but then again, it's his fault that everybody has pinned all of their woes on him, right? And let's not forget that the way the mob comprises Godzilla's shadow implies that they embody the kaiju's wrath, which means he's on their side. You know, it's not even the shallowness or one-sidedness of this comic that gets me. It's where it lands in the anthology that really does it in. Remember, the previous chapter, in summation, concluded that Godzilla cannot be contained by mankind's paltry, limited understanding of the universe. Aftermath immediately follows this up by conflating Godzilla's existence with an extremist agenda and retribution against people who think otherwise. I mean, you see the contradiction, right? Godzilla is impossible to define with human concepts and thus exists beyond our understanding. Godzilla supports my political beliefs and opposes my enemies who deserve to die for being evil. Those two statements cannot be true at the same time. It's one or the other, not both. I mean, heck, even the feminist Mothra chapter doesn't say Godzilla himself is a feminist, but that he instead restores order, so it kind of fits in with the other stories on a thematic level, even if it's still biased. This, on the other hand, doesn't even belong in the book. And setting the reprinted issues aside, this is how the new material ends. Not by celebrating Godzilla, but by endorsing an agenda that has nothing to do with Godzilla. And no, this is not in line with the previous movies. Let's bring up Mothra vs. Godzilla as a counterexample. Some people might point out that Godzilla kills the two capitalist villains in the movie, and say that that's in line with something like what this comic would do. But if you focus on that, you're missing out on a lot of what that movie has to say. The whole point of Godzilla's depiction in this movie is that he kills indiscriminately as he marches across the mainland. Innocent, honest people who have nothing to do with the exploitation of Mothra's egg are suffering and dying, and the view of the infant islanders that Godzilla is delivering retribution on their behalf, and their enemies are simply reaping what they have sown, is misguided. Godzilla doesn't represent them any more than he represents any human tribe, because he doesn't care about human squabbling. He's just moving with his own intentions. The islanders are projecting their anger onto a monster who would just as soon destroy them as anyone else while they play the victim card, and that makes them hypocrites perpetuating a cycle of violence and hatred. By accepting that Mothra must help, even if she dies in the process, they also accept that they must let go of their anger, and that not everyone who lives outside of their tribe is an enemy who deserves to die. Even the way the villains die speaks to this. They have plenty of time to evacuate, which would allow them to settle their quarrel another day. Unfortunately for them, their love of the almighty yen eclipses everything else, so they get caught up in a petty fight over money as Godzilla bears down on them. Godzilla doesn't even know they're in his way. Heck, he doesn't even deliberately kill them. He goes around the building and his tail hits it with barely a thought. The point is that Godzilla does not care that the two green-eyed monsters in his path are so set in their ways that they care more about money than their own lives. These two greedy idiots are the agents of their own demise. Godzilla just happens to punch the winner's ticket. See, that's how you deliver an effective message in a Godzilla story, not the ham-fisted tripe that closes the comic. Well, they say nothing is perfect, and in the end I guess it is still impressive that Godzilla's 70th anniversary has way more hits than misses. I do think it's still worth reading, and hey, the bad parts are easy enough to skip. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. So, happy Godzilla Day, G-fans. Here's looking forward to 71 more years of Godzilla. Whatever that winds up looking like.